The gauge read 1800 psi. Should have been enough for 6 hours underground, but I'd learned not to trust shoulds when it came to abandoned mines. I tapped the dial twice, old habit from my Navy days, and watched the needle hold steady. The black rock entrance yawned open like a mouth full of broken teeth, all jagged rock and shadow where the original timber framing had rotted away. 3 geologists missing. That's what Sheriff Singh had told me 4 hours ago, standing in his cramped office with coffee rings on every flat surface and a fan that wheezed like it had black lung. Dr. Shelby Tran, lead researcher from the university, he'd said, sliding a photo across his desk. Asian woman, early 40s maybe, with the kind of focused eyes you see on people who spend their lives looking for answers in rocks. Dr. Zachary Hayes, her colleague. Another photo, Hispanic guy with laugh lines and field gear that looked actually used, not just worn for grant proposal photos. And Elaine Bravo, graduate student. The kid looked barely old enough to buy beer, all freckles and eager smile under auburn hair. Singh had leaned back in his chair, making it groan. They went down yesterday morning, supposed to be a 12-hour survey. We're at 18 hours now, no contact. The entrance air tasted like rust and old water. I clipped my descent line to the anchor bolt somebody had drilled into the granite years back, probably when the mine still pulled copper out of the mountain's guts. The bolt held when I yanked it. Good enough. They were investigating anomalies, Singh had continued, pulling out printouts covered in wavy lines and color gradients. Ground-penetrating radar picked up cavities that shouldn't be there. Natural formations, not mine workings. I'd studied those printouts while Singh talked. The radar signatures showed voids starting around 1,500 feet, spreading out like tree roots. Big spaces, too big for standard mining operations. Why'd they go down alone? I'd asked. Singh had given me the look law enforcement saves for questions they've already asked themselves. Because they're academics. Think hazard assessments are for construction workers. My headlamp beam cut through the entrance shadow, revealing the first stretch of tunnel. The original miners had carved it wide enough for ore carts, but moisture and time had narrowed it with mineral deposits that looked like frozen waterfalls. I started down, boots finding purchase on the worn grooves where thousands of miners had walked the same path back when Blackrock fed half of Montana's copper appetite. The mountain had been restless lately. That's the other thing Singh had told me. Seismic monitors picking up tremors, little ones mostly, but getting more frequent. Like the mountains got indigestion, he'd said, not quite joking. The geology boys at the state office were calling it tectonic adjustment, which is their way of saying they didn't know why the earth was shifting but didn't want to sound worried about it. 20 feet in, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. My breath clouded in the headlamp beam. The walls here still showed drill scars from the pneumatic bits they'd used in the 80s before Ricky Hart shut the whole operation down. I'd never met Hart, but his name was all over the permits and inspection reports I'd reviewed. Meticulous guy, from what I could tell. Not the type to close a profitable mine without good reason. Descent Team 1 to base. I keyed my radio, checking the connection before I got too deep. Base here. Nova Hampton's voice came through clear. Professional, calm, the kind of voice you want on the other end when you're heading into the dark. Reading you 5x5, Descent 1. Beginning primary descent, starting my clock now. Copy that. Clock running at 13:22 hours. The main shaft angled down at 30 degrees, following the copper vein that had made somebody rich a century ago. Rail tracks appeared under my boots, the narrow gauge kind they'd used for ore carts. Orange rust covered the rails like fur, flaking off where my boots touched. Every 50 feet, wooden support beams crossed overhead. Half of them had gone soft with rot, sagging under the weight of the mountain. At 300 feet, I hit the first junction. 3 tunnels branched off the main shaft, 2 heading horizontal into the mountain's flanks, 1 continuing down. The air moved differently here, pulling slightly toward the downward passage. Air only moves in mines for 3 reasons: temperature difference, pressure change, or something very wrong. This felt like temperature. Warmer air rising from below, creating a natural convection. I made a note in my mental map and continued down. Passing 300 feet, I reported. Following main shaft. Good air movement. Copy. Descent 1. The timber supports got older as I descended, changing from machine-cut beams to hand-hewn logs that belonged in a museum. Whoever had dug the original Blackrock had started from the bottom, following the ore up. Made sense. Gravity helps when you're moving tons of rock. But it meant the deepest parts were also the oldest, cut when safety standards meant keeping a canary alive. At 600 feet, I found the first trace of the geologists. A granola bar wrapper caught against a support beam. Still shiny, no dust. I picked it up, checked the date stamp. 2 days ago. They'd definitely come this way. The shaft narrowed past 800 feet. Not dramatically, but enough that I had to duck under the support beams instead of walking beneath them. The walls pressed closer, rough-cut stone sweating moisture that made everything slick. My radio crackled with static, Nova's check-ins getting fuzzier. Base, Descent 1, signals degrading. How do you read? Descent, breaking up, I switched to the backup frequency. Clearer, but not by much. The mountain was swallowing the radio waves, all that stone and mineral content acting like a sponge. The rails ended at 900 feet. Just stopped, like whoever laid them had decided that was deep enough. Past that point, the floor turned to carved steps, uneven and worn smooth by water and boots. Someone had strung LED markers along the walls here, modern additions, probably from the last safety inspection. Half of them had failed, leaving pools of darkness between the surviving lights. At 1,000 feet, I found where the geologists had stopped to rest, energy bar wrappers again, and marks in the dust where they'd set down equipment. 3 distinct boot prints in a muddy patch, 2 smaller, 1 medium, matched their sizes from the files. They'd been moving with purpose, not panicking. That was good. Panic kills people in places like this faster than cave-ins. Descent 1 at 1,000-foot marker, I reported, voice competing with static. Found traces. They rested here. Nova's response came through garbled, but I caught enough to know she'd logged it. The passage split again past their rest spot. The maps showed the main tunnel continuing straight, but fresh scrape marks on the left-hand wall caught my attention. Paint transfer from equipment cases, bright yellow against the stone. They'd gone left, into a passage marked on my map as condemned, unstable. I followed. The condemned tunnel lived up to its reputation. Support beams had failed in multiple places, leaving sections of ceiling held up by hope and mineral deposits. The floor angled sharply down, turning treacherous with loose stone that skittered away under my boots. My altimeter showed 1,200 feet, then 13, then 14. The air grew thicker, warmer, carrying a smell like hot metal. Radio contact died completely at 1,400 feet. I tried both frequencies, got nothing but static that sounded like whispers. On my own now. The passage narrowed until my shoulders brushed both walls, and I had to turn sideways to squeeze through sections. Whoever had cut this tunnel hadn't cared about comfort. They'd been following something specific, probably a vein of high-grade ore that played out fast. 1,500 feet. My headlamp caught something that shouldn't exist. The tunnel ended in a wall of collapsed stone, just like the maps indicated, but the collapse looked wrong, too neat. And at the bottom, where the rocks met the floor, someone had been digging. Fresh tool marks scarred the stone. Hammer strikes, chisel work, all of it recent. A battery-powered rock drill lay abandoned nearby, bits still embedded in the wall. They'd broken through, a gap just wide enough for a person opened into darkness beyond. The stones they'd removed were stacked carefully to one side, sorted by size like someone planning to put them back. I crouched by the opening, aiming my light through. The beam disappeared into a vast space, swallowed by darkness too big for my headlamp to define. But what made me pause was the air flowing out. Warm. No, more than warm. Heated, like standing near an oven. My thermometer read 78 degrees in the main tunnel. I held it near the gap and watched it climb. 80, 85, 90, still rising when I pulled it back. The geologists had found something that wasn't on any map, wasn't in any survey. They'd chipped through into a natural cavity that shouldn't exist this high in the mountain. And the temperature. Mines get hotter as you go deeper, sure, but not like this. Not jumping 20 degrees in a few feet. This heat was coming from something else. The beam from my headlamp shot out into nothing. Pure black space that swallowed the light whole. I swept it left, right, up. Couldn't find a wall, couldn't find a ceiling. Just emptiness on a scale that shouldn't exist this deep. My brain kept trying to process it, kept failing. You spend enough years underground, you get used to tight spaces, to walls you can touch. This was something else entirely. I clicked on my secondary light, the big halogen strapped to my chest harness. 2,000 lumens blazing out, and still the darkness ate it up. The floor sloped away from the opening, smooth limestone that felt almost polished under my boots. Not the rough-hewn rock you'd expect in a natural cave. This had been worked by something. Water, time, I didn't know what. I took 3 steps forward and had to stop. The space was doing something to my inner ear, to my sense of balance. Without walls to reference, without a ceiling to ground me, my body couldn't figure out which way was truly up. I've been in big chambers before, worked a rescue in Mammoth Cave once where the main gallery could fit a whole building. But this was different. This was wrong on some fundamental level. The floor continued that gentle slope and I followed it down, keeping my lights moving, trying to map the space in my head. 20 feet from the entrance, my beam finally caught something. A wall to my left curving away into the dark. The surface was smooth as glass, covered in these flowing formations like frozen waterfalls. Flowstone, we call it. Takes millions of years to form, water dripping with dissolved minerals, building up layer by microscopic layer. But the patterns. Christ, the patterns. At first glance, it looked natural. The way the stone flowed and pooled, the ripples and waves carved by endless centuries of water. But the more I looked, the more wrong it seemed. There were shapes in the flow. Hexagons. Perfect hexagons, like a giant honeycomb had been pressed into the rock while it was still soft. Each one maybe 3 feet across, edges sharp and clean as if cut with a laser. I ran my hand over one of the hexagons. The surface was warm, warmer than the air even. Smooth too, smoother than any natural rock formation I'd ever touched. The edges where one hexagon met another formed these perfect straight lines, geometrically precise in a way that nature just doesn't do. Moving along the wall, I found more patterns. Spirals that maintained exact mathematical ratios as they curved outward. Parallel lines running for 50 feet without a single deviation. Circles nested inside circles, each one exactly half the diameter of the one containing it. My headlamp picked out the details, threw shadows that made the patterns seem to shift and move. The geologists would have gone crazy over this. Would have spent hours measuring, photographing, trying to explain how water erosion could create such perfect geometry. That thought made me scan the floor with my lights, looking for their tracks, for any sign of which way they'd gone in this vast space. Found their boot prints in a thin layer of mineral dust about 30 feet from the entrance. 3 sets, moving together, following the wall like I was doing. Smart move. In a space this big, you hug the wall or risk getting turned around, lost in the dark. I kept following their trail, the patterns on the wall growing more complex as I went. Now there were triangles interlocking with the hexagons, forming these 3-dimensional illusions that hurt to look at directly. In some places the stone had been carved, no other word for it, into shapes that reminded me of circuit boards, or maybe ancient writing, lines connecting nodes, branching and rejoining in ways that suggested purpose, suggested meaning. That's when my lights caught the first splash of color against the pale limestone. Safety orange, modern, artificial, completely out of place in this ancient space. Elaine's backpack. It was lying on its side maybe 20 feet ahead, one strap torn completely off. Her water bottles had rolled free, her field notebook splayed open with pages scattered across the stone. I quickened my pace, my lights searching, already knowing what I'd find but hoping somehow I was wrong. She was crumpled against the wall like a discarded doll. I've seen death underground before. Cave-ins, gas pockets, equipment failures. Death always looks unnatural in the dark, bodies out of place among the stone. But this was different. Elaine was sitting with her back against the wall, legs splayed out, head tilted back at an angle that made my neck ache in sympathy. Her headlamp was still on, battery nearly dead, casting a weak yellow glow across her face. Her eyes were open, wide open. Pupils dilated so far the green of her iris was just a thin ring. Her mouth hung slack, and I could see she'd bitten through her lower lip. Blood had run down her chin, dried to rusty brown on her field vest. But it was her expression that made me stop cold. Terror. Pure, absolute terror frozen on her face like she'd seen something that had broken her mind before it stopped her heart. I knelt beside her, checked for a pulse even though I knew it was pointless. Her skin was cold despite the heat of the cave. Rigor had set in. She'd been dead for hours at least. I forced myself to examine her clinically, looking for injuries, for any sign of what had killed her. Nothing. No wounds, no trauma, no obvious cause. Just that expression and the way her hands were clenched, fingernails dug so deep into her palms they'd drawn blood. Her equipment was scattered around her like she'd thrown it off in a panic. Camera smashed against the wall, lens shattered. Sample containers opened and spilled. rock fragments scattered across the floor. Her GPS unit was still clipped to her belt, screen cracked but functional. The track on it showed she'd made it about 300 yards into the cave before whatever happened. I looked back the way I'd come. 300 yards. In this vast space, that was nothing. She'd barely started exploring before something had sent her running back toward the entrance, had made her collapse here against the wall with that look of absolute horror frozen on her young face. My radio crackled. Not Nova's voice, not any voice, just static, but static with a pattern. 3 short bursts, 3 long, 3 short. SOS in Morse code. Then it shifted. Longer sequences, complex patterns that rose and fell like music, like language, like something trying to communicate. I grabbed the radio, checked the frequency, still on the backup channel we'd switched to earlier. Nova? Base, this is Kennedy. Do you copy? The patterns continued, ignoring my transmission. The sound was coming through the speaker, but also, I turned in a slow circle, listening, also from the cave itself. The walls were picking up the signal, amplifying it, turning the whole massive chamber into a resonating chamber. The pulses grew stronger, more complex. My equipment started responding, LED lights flickering in time with the rhythm, electronic compass spinning wildly, altimeter showing impossible readings. The interference was coming from deeper in the cave, from whatever lay beyond this massive chamber. I should have turned back, should have photographed Elaine's body, marked the location, retreated to the surface to report what I'd found. That would have been the professional move, the safe move. But Tran and Hayes were still missing, still somewhere in this impossible place. I carefully closed Elaine's eyes, arranged her body in a more dignified position, took photos for the report I'd have to write. Then I stood, checked my air gauge, still had 4 hours, and started following the boot prints deeper into the cave. The radio patterns followed me, growing stronger with each step. The walls here showed even more impossible geometry, fractals carved in stone, mathematical sequences that repeated at different scales, shapes that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. The patterns hurt to look at, made my brain itch trying to process them. The floor began to change too. The smooth limestone gave way to something else, something that crunched under my boots like gravel but wasn't. I knelt, focused my light on it. Fragments of something organic, but mineralized, turned to stone but keeping its structure, like walking on a carpet of fossilized leaves, except these weren't leaves. Too thick, too rigid, with these strange branching patterns that reminded me of coral or maybe nerve endings. The temperature hit 105, 108. My throat burned with each breath, and I had to force myself to sip water regularly, to not drain my supplies too fast. The interference on the radio was constant now, a symphony of electronic noise that seemed almost purposeful, almost alive. 50 yards past where I'd found Elaine, the boot prints I was following suddenly scattered. Instead of 3 sets moving together, they split apart, 2 sets veering left along the wall, 1 set heading straight out into the darkness, signs of urgency in the spacing, the depth of the impressions. They'd been running. I followed the 2 sets along the wall, figuring Tran and Hayes would have stuck together, would have tried to maintain some kind of protocol even in panic. The patterns on the walls were changing again, becoming less geometric and more organic. Flowing shapes that looked almost like anatomy diagrams, branching structures that could have been blood vessels or root systems or neural pathways. Then my lights hit something that made me stop dead. The wall opened up into an alcove, maybe 20 feet deep and 30 wide, but it wasn't empty. The entire back surface was covered in fossils, but fossils like nothing I'd ever seen in any museum, any textbook, any fever dream. They were embedded in the stone like insects in amber, but the preservation was impossible. I could see detail that should have been lost millions of years ago. The texture of what might have been skin, the joining of segments, the delicate structures of what looked like sensory organs. The creatures, I don't know what else to call them, were wrong on every level. They had segmented bodies like insects, with thick chitinous plates covering each section. But the segments were huge, each one the size of a dinner plate, and there were dozens of them forming bodies that had to be 10, 12 feet long. Between the plates, I could see what looked like vertebrae, an actual spine running through the creature like someone had tried to build a centipede on a reptilian frame. The heads were the worst part. Triangular, almost mantis-like, but with eye sockets that faced forward like a predator. The jaws opened sideways and were filled with teeth. Actual teeth, not mandibles, arranged in multiple rows. Some specimens had their mouths open, frozen in what looked like screams or attack postures. They had limbs too, dozens of them, jointed in too many places, ending in structures that were part claw, part hand. Some specimens were splayed out flat against the stone. Others were curled up like dead spiders. One was positioned like it had been trying to claw its way out of the rock when it died. But here's what made my skin crawl. They looked fresh. Not fresh like they died yesterday, but fresh like they died decades ago, not millions of years. I could see organic material in some of them, dark and desiccated but still present. Tissue that should have fossilized, should have been replaced by minerals over geological time, but hadn't been. I reached out to touch one, then jerked my hand back. The stone around them was hot, genuinely hot, like touching a radiator. And there was this smell, sweet and corrupt, like fruit rotting in a sealed container. It was coming from the fossils themselves, seeping out of microscopic pores in the rock. The radio interference peaked, so loud I had to turn the volume down. The patterns were faster now, more urgent, like a heart rate climbing toward panic. My lights started strobing, creating a disorienting flicker effect that made the fossils seem to move, to twitch in their stone prison. I took photos, dozens of them, trying to document what I was seeing even though I knew no one would believe it. The camera flash reflected off structures in the fossils that looked almost metallic, like these creatures had incorporated minerals into their biology, had built their bodies out of both flesh and stone. At the base of the fossil wall, I found more equipment. Hayes's sample kit, opened and abandoned. Rock hammers and chisels scattered around like they'd been trying to extract one of the specimens. And there, scratched into the soft limestone with what looked like a knife or maybe a rock pick, a message. "They're not extinct," Hayes's handwriting. I recognized it from the field notes Singh had shown me. Below that, smaller, more frantic. "Still warm, still warm, still warm." The implications of that made my hands shake as I photographed the writing. These things, whatever they weren't ancient history. They were recent. Recent enough that organic material survived. Recent enough that the stone around them still radiated heat from what? From when they'd been entombed? From some biological process that continued even after death? I backed away from the fossil wall, following the boot prints as they led out of the alcove. They were running now, both sets, stride length showing full sprint. Something had happened here. Something that had sent two experienced geologists fleeing deeper into the cave instead of back toward the exit. The patterns on the radio shifted again, and for just a moment, buried in the static, I could have sworn I heard something that sounded like breathing. The boot prints ended at Hayes. I found him 30 yards past the fossil alcove, crumpled against the cave wall like someone had tossed him there. His headlamp still worked, weak yellow beam pointing at nothing. The blood pool under him had already gone tacky in that furnace heat. I've seen death before. Cave-ins, equipment failures, drownings. But Hayes, Christ, something had punched holes clean through him. Not bullet holes, too big. More like someone had driven fence posts through his chest and stomach. 3 wounds, maybe 4, hard to tell with all the blood, each one the size of my fist. His pack lay 10 feet away, contents scattered. Sample bags, water bottles, that fancy GPS unit they all carried. I picked up his tablet, screen cracked but still functional. The movement detection app was open, timestamp showing 13:27, 2 minutes before I'd found him, based on the body temperature. The screen showed a mess of data. Motion sensors had gone crazy in his final seconds. Red dots appearing all around his position on the cave map, moving fast, converging. I scrolled back through the readings. Normal, normal, normal. Then boom. Motion signatures everywhere at once. The software had tagged them. Multiple contacts. Velocity, 1520, MPH, pattern, coordinated approach. Coordinated. That word sat heavy in my gut. I looked closer at Hayes's wounds. The edges weren't torn like you'd expect from rocks or metal. They were precise. 2 puncture points per wound, maybe 18 inches apart. Like massive pincers had grabbed him, and my headlamp swept the wall behind his body. Those fossil things, the mantis nightmare creatures in the alcove, their heads had those triangular shapes, those sideways jaws. I'd been staring at their mandibles for 10 minutes back there, measuring them with my eyes, thinking how they'd slice through prey. The spacing would be about 18 inches, same as Hayes's wounds. The radio static chose that moment to spike. Not random anymore. Patterns within patterns. Almost like voices, if voices could be made of electricity and heat. Then underneath it, cutting through the white noise, I heard something that made every hair on my arms stand up. Chittering, like crickets, but deeper. Coming from the tunnel ahead. Then answering calls from behind me. To my left, where the darkness swallowed my light. More responses from the right, somewhere up in the invisible ceiling. They were talking to each other. My thermal scanner hung from my belt. Standard equipment for finding heat signatures in cold caves. Didn't expect to need it in a 110-degree oven. I powered it on anyway. The screen lit up like a Christmas tree. Heat blooms everywhere. Moving through the walls. No, through passages I couldn't see. Parallel to the main chamber, above it, below. This whole section of mountain was Swiss cheese, and the holes were full of things running hot. One signature stopped 20 feet to my left, just waiting. Another circled behind, using the cover of flowstone formations. They moved like pack hunters, watching, planning. The one on my left shifted position. The scanner showed it clearly, 7 feet long, maybe 8. Internal temperature reading said 130 degrees. Hotter than the cave air, hotter than any mammal could survive. Whatever these things were, they weren't mammals. I backed away from Hayes's body, keeping the wall at my back. The chittering got louder, closer. My light caught something moving in the shadows, gone before I could focus on it. Fast, so damn fast. The thermal scanner showed 3 signatures converging on Hayes's position. Feeding time, maybe, or just checking their kill. I didn't plan to stick around to find out. I followed the cave wall, moving away from the body. The geometrical patterns in the stone seemed to pulse in my peripheral vision, tricks of the light and adrenaline. Had to be. The radio static followed my movement, rising and falling like breathing. 50 yards from Hayes, I found Tran. What was left of her anyway. She'd made it farther than the others, almost to what looked like the chamber's far wall. Her body lay in pieces. I'll spare you the details. But it was the wall behind her that made me forget to breathe. Eggs. Had to be eggs. Dozens of them, each the size of a basketball. Translucent membrane sacs stuck to the cave wall in neat rows. The light from my headlamp passed right through them, showing shadows inside. Moving shadows. I stepped closer, thermal scanner forgotten. The sacs pulsed with internal rhythm. Slow expansion, contraction, like breathing, like heartbeats. Inside each one, something shifted. Coiled shapes with too many legs, folded wings, or were those arms? Hard to tell through the cloudy membrane. One sac near the floor had torn open, empty. The edges of the tear still wet with some kind of mucus. Fresh. That's when it clicked. All of it. The geologists hadn't died from cave-ins, hadn't gotten lost or fallen down shafts. They'd found something living down here, something that had been sleeping in the deep heat. Maybe for centuries, maybe longer. The mining operations back in the day, they'd never gone this deep. Ricky Hart had shut things down at 900 feet, maybe 1,000. Never pushed into the mountain's real guts. Never sent ground-penetrating radar pulses into the stone to map what lay beneath. But Tran and her team had. They'd aimed their fancy equipment at the mountain and pinged the depths. Sent vibrations through rock that had been still for God knows how long. And something had pinged back. The chittering rose to a crescendo around me. The thermal scanner showed heat signatures moving with purpose now. Not hunting behavior, defensive positioning. Surrounding the egg chamber, protecting the nest. These things hadn't attacked the geologists out of hunger. This was territory. This was family. The ground-penetrating radar hadn't just mapped caves. It had knocked on the door of a nursery, and Mama had answered. The first one came out of the wall. I'd backed away from that nightmare nursery, thermal scanner showing 6, maybe 7 heat signatures moving in the darkness beyond my light. The chittering had gone quiet. That should have been my warning. Predators don't announce themselves when they're ready to strike. The rock face to my right just opened. Not a crack or crevice I'd missed. The thing had been pressed flat against the limestone, its segments compressed like an accordion, matching the stone's color so perfectly my eyes had passed right over it. When it unfolded, joints popping like knuckles, it stretched out to nearly 8 feet. Up close, the fossils in that alcove had been a poor preview. This thing moved with liquid grace, each segment rotating independent of the others, dozens of legs finding purchase on surfaces that looked smooth as glass. Its head swiveled toward me, triangular, just like the fossils, but the eyes weren't empty sockets. They caught my headlamp beam and threw it back, multifaceted like a fly's, but each facet the size of a dime. The mandibles opened sideways. Hayes's wound suddenly made perfect sense. I yanked the Glock from my chest holster, always carried one in tight spaces, never knew when you'd meet something unfriendly underground. The 9mm rounds punched through its thorax, leaving holes that leaked something dark and syrupy. The creature didn't even flinch, just tilted its head like it was curious about the new sensation. Then the others emerged. From cracks in the ceiling I hadn't noticed. From behind flowstone formations. One squeezed out of a gap barely 6 inches wide, its body compressing and expanding like it was made of rubber instead of chitin. My thermal scanner went crazy, heat signatures everywhere, the display looking like someone had spilled hot coals across the screen. They moved in patterns. That's what made my skin crawl more than their appearance. These weren't mindless insects following chemical trails. When I shifted left, 2 of them adjusted their positions to cut off that escape route. When I raised the Glock again, 3 others spread out, making it impossible to cover them all. Pack hunters, millions of years old and still using tactics that would make a wolf pack jealous. The first one, the wall crawler, struck while I was tracking the others. It covered 15 feet in maybe half a second, mandibles spread wide enough to take my head clean off. I threw myself sideways, felt the wind of its passage, heard those jaws snap shut on empty air with a sound like scissors cutting cardboard. My shoulder hit limestone hard. The Glock skittered away into darkness. 2 more rushed from opposite sides. I rolled forward, came up running, their legs clicking on stone behind me like typewriter keys. The egg chamber fell behind as I sprinted deeper into the cave, following the path Tran must have taken in her final moments. The demo charges in my pack bounced with each step. Standard protocol for unstable passages, sometimes you had to make your own exit. 4 charges, each about the size of a hockey puck. RDX-based, stable unless you hit them with the detonator signal. I'd used similar ones in Afghanistan, clearing cave complexes in the mountains. Difference was, those caves hadn't been full of prehistoric nightmares. The tunnel narrowed ahead, walls closing in. Good for me. Less room for them to maneuver. Bad because it also meant less room to dodge. I could hear them behind me, that clicking getting closer. And worse, I could hear them in the walls. They were using passages I couldn't see, running parallel routes through cracks and crevices their flexible bodies could navigate. My headlamp caught movement ahead. Another one, bigger than the others, blocked the tunnel. This one looked older, its chitin scarred and pitted, one antenna bent at an odd angle. A survivor. How many centuries had it lived down here in the heat and darkness? It didn't charge. Just stood there, mandibles slightly open, watching me with those compound eyes. Buying time for the others to catch up. Smart. Too smart. I yanked the first charge from my pack, thumbed the arming switch. The little LED blinked red, 30-second timer once triggered. The creature tilted its head, studying this new object. 20 feet between us. The ones behind maybe 40 feet and closing. I triggered the timer and threw it high, right at the ceiling where a massive flowstone formation hung like a chandelier. The charge stuck. They're magnetic, designed to cling to rebar or steel supports. The creature's eyes tracked the arc, followed the blinking light. 28 seconds. I dove left into a side passage I'd barely noticed, more crack than tunnel. Squeezed through as mandibles snapped at my boots, felt one hook tear through the leather. The passage opened into another chamber, smaller than the main cave but still large enough that my light didn't find the far wall. 20 seconds. More heat signatures on the scanner. They were coming through the walls, converging on my position. One dropped from the ceiling right in front of me, landing with barely a sound despite its size. Its mandibles spread wide, head lowering for the strike. I rolled between its legs, a move that would have been impossible if these things had been built like normal arthropods. But their segments and joints bent in ways that defied everything I knew about exoskeletons. Its strike hit empty floor as I came up behind it, already running again. 10 seconds. The chittering rose to a crescendo. They knew something was wrong. Maybe they could sense the electrical charge building in the detonator, or maybe they just recognized a threat. The one I dodged spun around faster than anything that size should move, legs blurring as it pursued. 5 seconds. I hit the deck behind a limestone ridge, hands over my ears. The blast shook the mountain. In confined spaces, explosions don't just blow things up. They create overpressure waves that can liquefy organs, rupture eardrums, collapse lungs. The charge wasn't huge, but in that tunnel it might as well have been a freight train of compressed air and vaporized rock. The flowstone formation came down like God's own hammer. Tons of limestone that had been growing for millions of years suddenly obeyed gravity's call. I heard the old one's death scream, a sound like sheet metal tearing mixed with that cricket chittering, before the roar of collapsing stone drowned out everything else. Dust billowed into my chamber, thick as flour. My ears rang despite the protection. Through the haze, I saw the passage I'd come through was gone, buried under rubble. 1 down, 3 to go. But the charges had done more than bring down rock. The blast had revealed something else, metal gleaming through cracked stone. Rail tracks, but not the narrow gauge from the mine above. These were wider, heavier, leading deeper into the mountain. The arthropods regrouped fast. Heat signatures showed them testing the rubble pile, looking for ways through. Others circled around, seeking alternate routes. They'd be on me again in minutes. I followed the rails. The metal was corroded but not ancient, maybe from the 40s or 50s. The tunnel they ran through was carved with precision, walls smooth and regular. This wasn't mining work. Someone had built this for another purpose, and they'd built it to last. 100 yards in, I found the door. Steel, riveted, with warnings in English and something that might have been Russian. The locking wheel was seized with rust, but the charges in my pack would fix that. Behind me, the chittering grew louder. They'd found a way around the cave-in. I slapped the second charge on the lock mechanism, set the timer for 15 seconds, and pressed myself against the far wall. The thermal scanner showed them coming fast. 4 signatures moving in that coordinated pattern, too high, too low, 10 seconds. The first one rounded the corner, mandibles already spread. It covered the distance faster than I could track, those dozen legs a blur of motion. I rolled aside as it struck, felt mandibles scrape sparks off the steel door. 5 seconds. 2 more appeared, moving to flank. No time to run. I yanked my knife. A good one, titanium blade that could punch through Kevlar. Not much against creatures that shrugged off 9mm rounds, but it was what I had. The blast took the door off its hinges and caught the lead arthropod square in the face. The overpressure wave in that narrow tunnel turned its head into pulp, body segments flying apart like a broken chain. The other 2 reeled back, momentarily stunned. I dove through the doorway into darkness. The room beyond was some kind of control station. Banks of equipment lined the walls. Old vacuum tube stuff, analog gauges, switches and dials labeled in multiple languages. In the center sat a massive diesel generator, silent for decades. And on the far wall, another door. This one already open, revealing stairs leading up, an escape route. Someone had known about these things, had built this station to monitor or contain them, and they'd made sure there was a way out. The remaining arthropods recovered fast. They flowed through the doorway like liquid nightmare, spreading out to surround me. But I was already moving, 3rd charge in hand. This one I threw at the ceiling directly above the doorway. 30 seconds to bring down enough rock to seal this chamber. They understood immediately. Both creatures rushed me, abandoning any pretense of strategy, just pure killing instinct, trying to finish me before I could trap them. I made it 3 steps up the stairs before the first one caught me. Its weight slammed me into the metal steps, mandibles punching through my pack, missing my spine by inches. I twisted hard, brought the knife up in a reverse grip, and drove it into one of those compound eyes. The blade went into the hilt, and this time the creature felt it. It reared back, shrieking, dark fluid spraying from the wound. The second one came over its wounded companion, legs spread wide to grab me from all angles. I kicked off the wall, rolled down several steps, came up running. My pack was torn, equipment spilling out, but I still had 1 charge left. 20 seconds on the timer above. The stairs switch-backed, old metal groaning under our combined weight. The wounded one followed despite the knife still buried in its eye, moving slower but just as determined. Its companion bounded past it, gaining on me with each stride. I rounded another landing and saw daylight. Not direct sun, just that faint gray that meant somewhere above, the world still existed. The stairs kept going up, but I could smell fresh air mixing with the stale underground atmosphere. My legs burned, lungs working like bellows in the heat. Behind me, those typewriter legs clicked closer. 15 seconds on the charge below. The lead arthropod lunged. I spun, using its momentum, and shoved it past me into the stair railing. The old metal gave way with a shriek, and the creature tumbled into the shaft, legs scrabbling for purchase that wasn't there. It vanished into darkness, chittering, echoing up the stairwell. 10 seconds. The wounded one kept coming, knife handle still protruding from its eye. Blood, or whatever that dark fluid was, dripped steadily, leaving a trail on the metal steps. It moved differently now, favoring one side, segments not quite aligned, but those mandibles still worked fine. 5 seconds. I triggered the last charge and dropped it right at my feet, then took the stairs 3 at a time. The arthropod hesitated. Maybe it recognized the blinking red light, remembered what happened to its companion at the doorway. That hesitation saved my life. The blast came as I rounded the next landing. The entire stairwell shook, metal supports groaning. Below, I heard the wounded creature's shriek cut short as the stairs collapsed, taking it down into the shaft. More importantly, I heard the bigger collapse starting, the charge in the control room finally bringing down the ceiling. The whole mountain seemed to shift. Rock ground against rock with sounds like thunder. Dust erupted up the stairwell, thick and choking. I kept climbing, feeling the stairs sway beneath me, welds popping like firecrackers. Somewhere far below, tons of limestone found new configurations, sealing passages that had been open since before humans walked upright. The air grew cooler. The walls changed from carved stone to mined timber. I passed through another steel door, this one hanging open, lock long since cut, and suddenly I was in familiar territory. The 900-foot level of the Black Rock mine, where the narrow gauge tracks ended. My radio crackled to life. "Entity, Bentley, do you copy? We're registering massive seismic activity." Nova's voice. Had to be close to the surface for the signal to reach. I keyed the mic with shaking fingers. "Copy, base, making my way up. Structural collapse at depth, the others." I let it trail off. "Understood. Emergency teams are mobilizing. What's your status?" I looked down at myself. Pack shredded, equipment scattered somewhere in that nightmare below. Coveralls torn in a dozen places, blood seeping from cuts I hadn't noticed getting. But alive, breathing, human, mobile and ascending. Tell them to stay clear of the lower levels. Whole thing's coming down. It took another hour to reach daylight. Every few minutes, another tremor shook the mine as deeper sections found new equilibrium. By the time I emerged from the entrance, the sun was setting, painting the mountains orange and red. Sheriff Singh waited by the mobile command unit they'd set up, his turbaned head bent over seismic readouts. He looked up as I approached, face grave. "The others?" I shook my head. "Found all 3. Been dead for hours when I reached them. Looks like the cave-in caught them mapping that anomaly they detected." I pulled Tran's tablet from what was left of my pack, one of the few pieces of evidence I'd managed to save. Got some of their data, but the important stuff was probably on equipment that's buried now. Singh took the tablet, nodded slowly. "The seismic activity. Our instruments showed multiple detonations. Had to use charges to clear some unstable sections. Try to reach them. That probably triggered the larger collapse. All true, just not complete. That whole lower system is gone. Nobody's getting down there again." He studied my face, those dark eyes searching, maybe wondering why my pack was torn by something that looked suspiciously like puncture wounds. Why I had that particular expression people get when they've seen something that rewrites their understanding of the world. But Singh was a practical man. 3 researchers dead, cave system collapsed, no way to recover bodies. The paperwork would be cleaner this way. "I'll need a full report," he said finally. "But given the conditions, I'm recommending immediate permanent closure. The state geology board's already approved it. That last collapse registered 3.2 on the Richter scale." I nodded, tried not to think about what might still be moving in the deep dark, testing the millions of tons of rock I'd brought down on their heads. How many other chambers existed down there? How far did those tunnels really go? "There's one more thing," I said, pulling a sample vial from my pocket. Inside, suspended in preservative, was a piece of chitin I'd cut from the wounded one's leg during our struggle on the stairs. Black as obsidian, with an iridescent sheen that seemed to shift in the dying light. Found this near where they died. Some kind of mineral formation, I think. Might help explain what they were so interested in. Singh held the vial up to the sunset. "Unusual. I'll make sure it gets to the state lab, though I doubt they'll find much. These old mines, sometimes the rock formations can be quite striking." Yeah, I agreed. Quite striking. The next morning, they began sealing the entrance. Concrete pumped into the shaft, hundreds of cubic yards creating a plug that would last centuries. The official report blamed unstable geology, noting that the researchers had ignored safety protocols by venturing into condemned areas. Their families received death certificates listing accidental cave-in as the cause. I kept copies of everything: photos, thermal readings, even that motion detection data from Hayes's tablet. Filed it all in a storage unit outside Reno, along with my real report. The one that mentioned the egg chamber, the impossible fossils, the arthropods that had survived 65 million years in the deep heat. The one that calculated how many generations had lived and died down there, perfectly adapted to their environment until human curiosity disturbed their sanctuary. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that control station. Who built it? How long had they known? Were there others, monitoring different sites where prehistoric life found refuge in the Earth's hidden spaces? But mostly, I think about the sound the mountain made as it settled, all that weight coming down, pressing tighter with each passing day. And I remember how flexible those things were, how they could compress their bodies to fit through impossible spaces. The concrete plug is 300 feet thick. The engineers assured everyone it would hold forever. I hope they're right.